Hello, everybody. Nurse Scott here. How are you? Welcome back to the Emergency Mind, the psychology of emergency department patients, families, and staff. Took me a minute. I had to remember the whole title. Again, this is the book I started writing 20 years ago when I was studying psychology, blending the two things I know best, emergency care and psychology. So today is the fifth installment of this. I guess we're calling it a video podcast. It's a podcast, but I do have visual aids that will appear over here. If you're listening to this on a podcast, I'm sorry you can't see those. I will try to describe them for you. So this is actually chapter 3, even though this is our fifth video podcast. We've gotten up to chapter 3, which will be in 2 parts because it's pretty long. It's kind of part of the meat of the book. So one day, I hope I will go back over everything and put it in good form and maybe get it out in a print version. But for now, this will do. So without further ado, this is chapter 3. This is chapter 3, Sudden Illness and Injury, Crisis of Mind. Max is a 53-year-old husband and father who works the 3rd shift as a security guard. One Thursday afternoon, his family was gathered at his home for his daughter Miranda's birthday celebration. Max suddenly felt an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. He sat down. His wife, Minnie, noticed he looked sweaty and as if he were having trouble breathing. His family urged him to go to the hospital. "Don't be silly. I'll be fine," he said. Quietly, his brother-in-law telephoned 911. When the paramedics arrived, Max was still insisting there was nothing wrong with him. Finally, he gave in to his family and allowed the ambulance to take him to the emergency department. Minnie and Miranda arrived at the hospital to find Max hooked up to the heart monitor and a nurse, Margie, drawing blood samples. Margie explained that Dr. Munson had examined Max, and they were now testing him to see if he was having a heart attack. The physician came in a while later. "Max," Dr. Munson said, "it looks like you might have had a small heart attack. We're going to need to keep you in the hospital overnight and run some more tests in the morning." No, Max protested. "I can't stay. I really don't feel it's safe to send you home until we know more." "I'm not staying. Do I need to sign something to get out of here?" "Max, you'll probably be released in just a day or two. What's your hesitation?" "I've been absent from work a lot lately, and if I miss work tonight, I'll lose my job." "Well, if you have a heart attack, it won't matter if you have a job or not, will it?" "Nothing's going to happen. I really have to go now." Dr. Munson tried to convince Max to stay, but without success. Max signed the form stating he was leaving the hospital against medical advice. Is it puzzling to you that Max would put his job ahead of his health? That he would deny the clear symptoms of a heart attack? That he would ignore the advice of a physician and leave the hospital without treatment? Do people really do that? Yes, they do. But why? This is the subject of this chapter, a sudden change in health and how people react to it. This section is the heart of the book. Patients display a variety of interesting behaviors in response to their sudden illness and arrival in the emergency department. There are a number of ways to look at ED patients psychologically. Here we will examine what's called the sick role, how the emergency department can be a source of stress itself, and how various factors influence how patients respond to stress. We conclude with advice for the healthcare professionals who work in the ED setting. Disclaimer. It's important to preface this discussion by noting that many ED patients come to the hospital, undergo tests, receive treatment, and are discharged or admitted without a major stress response. They undoubtedly experience discomfort and an interruption in their normal routines, but this does not create an emotional crisis and does not change their usual behavior. As a healthcare professional, I would like to think it's something we do to put their minds at ease. Perhaps that is part of the picture, but the patient's own psyche is more likely the reason. These patients almost certainly view illness, injury, and receiving medical care as normal, although infrequent human experiences. That is, they don't feel particularly threatened by becoming a patient. Further, they possess coping skills that allow them to maintain an inner sense of stability and safety. Psychology has been criticized for pathologizing everything, labeling every problem as an illness or a disorder, or at least focusing on abnormal and problematic behavior. This trend is just starting to change as psychological study begins to include normal mental processes and the ways people maintain their mental health. Perhaps how some people cope successfully with their ED visits is as interesting as why some do not. Nevertheless, at the risk of perpetuating psychology's pathology bias, we will go on to examine the latter in depth. The sick role. Perhaps the most basic psychological aspect of being a patient is that of sick people, and that sick people are somehow different from well people. Think about it. Can you tell by looking at someone that he or she is sick? Do you expect a sick person to act differently from a well person? When you're sick, do you expect people to treat you differently? Often, the answer is yes. The theory. In 1951, Harvard psychologist Talcott Parsons constructed a theoretical view of individuals who are sick. His theory outlines two rights and two obligations of individuals who become sick in our society. Rights. 1. The sick person is exempt from normal social roles. And 2. The sick person is not responsible for his or her condition. Obligations. 1. The sick person should try to get well. And 2. The sick person should seek competent help and cooperate with healthcare providers. Not all ED patients assume the sick role. Indeed, not all people who have a diagnosed illness take on the sick role. In fact, people vary in their ideas about what even makes a person sick. In your opinion, is a person sick if he or she has high blood pressure, a cold, the flu, a broken leg, clinical depression, cancer, and what if the cancer is in remission? Does a person have to be unable to work to be sick? Must he or she feel pain, discomfort, or some other symptom? Is taking medication every day the mark of a sick person? There are no right answers. In fact, very few generalizations can be made about who thinks what about being sick. Acceptance and rejection of the sick role. This is important because patient behavior changes depending on whether or not he or she views him or herself as sick. Those who do will not feel the pressure to perform their usual daily tasks, including work, household chores, and possibly their own bathing, grooming, dressing, and toileting. They expect help with these. They're likely to seek medical help. They expect a physician to diagnose a disease, that is, give it a name, and prescribe treatment, often medication. And they can become frustrated in their conditions if their conditions are not clear-cut and a definite diagnosis cannot be made. Chronic pain is an example of such frustration. After a battery of tests, the exact cause of pain may not be clear. Medication may or may not be successful in bringing relief. So in addition to the discomfort, there is anxiety about not knowing what it is, or more accurately, not having a name for the malady the person is sincerely experiencing. In response to this, the diagnosis of chronic pain syndrome was developed to describe pain lasting at least 6 months without a clear etiology, that is, cause. It does not, however, say anything about the cause of the symptoms. Many believe it to be psychosomatic in nature. To be clear, this means that the mind is influencing, amplifying, or causing real physiologic changes in the body, not that the person is making up the illness. Faking an illness is called malingering, and that's discussed later in this book. This example brings up an interesting psychological phenomenon. Not knowing causes anxiety, while knowing often alleviates it. When people with rare medical conditions finally find a diagnosis, even if there is no treatment or cure, they report their minds are put at ease, saying, "At least now we know what it is. At least now I know I'm not crazy, that I'm not imagining it all." See the notes later on primary gain. So what is this? As we'll see later, people assess their situation, the threat it might pose, and the possible ways they could cope with it. When the nature of the situation is not known, a person cannot choose a coping strategy. This accounts for the frustration reaction, such as, what do I do? What can I do? Knowledge is indeed power, the power to cope. Those who reject the sick role when they indeed have a medical condition may not engage in behavior that would improve their health. Remember Max? Parsons called these people hypochondriac. hyperchondriacs, sorry, the opposite of hypochondriacs. They put off checkups or refuse to take blood pressure or diabetes medication because, quote, I feel fine. Why would someone do this? We each have a unique self-concept, a mental picture of who we are. Things that threaten this picture are very difficult to accept. Sigmund Freud called this denial, one of the many defense mechanisms used to protect the self-concept, which he called ego integrity. More on defense mechanisms later. For most of us, our self-concept includes having a sound body and mind. We accept illness only as a temporary state. For some people, finding out they have a condition that will require treatment for the rest of their lives is too much to handle. It threatens their self-concept, and some never accept the reality of a chronic condition. Not surprisingly, they're less likely to follow a physician's advice. Research suggests that 50% of all people with chronic illnesses do not take their medication as prescribed. In the emergency department, we see many patients who've not been following their prescribed medical regimen. Diabetics may arrive with extremely high blood sugars and admit to not taking their medications or watching what they eat. Those with uncontrolled high blood pressure may come in with a heart attack, stroke, or kidney failure as a result of their noncompliance. While we as healthcare providers encourage these patients to take their conditions seriously and follow doctor's orders, the reality is that they must first complete a difficult psychological task. They must incorporate their medical condition into their existing self-concept. This takes time, and time is always in short supply in the emergency department. In fact, the process of coming to terms with a diagnosis can take months or years. In between the sick who accept their illness and those who do not, and not including those who are faking, and those patients who have no real physical problem but think they are sick, several terms are used in relation to this phenomenon. Quote, the worried well, or people with, quote, trivial illness, and also hypochondriac. A person who becomes obsessively worried about the possibility of a serious, undiagnosed disease based on minor symptoms is referred to as hypochondriac. In fact, from time to time, we may feel a number of aches and pains or funny sensations that don't represent any significant medical problem. While most of us will ignore these until they eventually go away on their own, those who obsess about them may start a psychosomatic process that causes them to continue. Such people will typically go to the doctor quite frequently, often seeing several physicians until one, quote-unquote, takes them seriously. This can lead them to the emergency department in the course of their, what we call, doctor shopping. How satisfied this type of patient is with his or her ED experience would seem to depend on three things. 1, feeling that the physician takes the problem seriously. 2, receiving a diagnosis, that is, having the problem officially named. And 3, receiving tangible proof of the illness, often in the form of a prescription. The first expectation is easy enough to meet. All patients should be treated by healthcare professionals with respect and taken seriously. The remaining two can be problematic. There may be no medical name for the symptoms the patient describes. In a pinch, a descriptive label can be used instead of one that indicates the cause. Examples are chronic pain syndrome and idiopathic nausea and vomiting. Idiopathic, by the way, is an impressive medicalese word simply meaning unknown cause. It's from the Greek root meaning the disease of its own kind. Finally, prescribing unnecessary drugs poses ethical and community health dilemmas. All medications are foreign substances put into the body. Prescribing them is not done lightly. Patients with viral illnesses, cold, flu, often request unnecessary antibiotics, even though they only combat bacterial infections. Overprescribing them leads to the emergence of resistant strains of bacteria in the community. The physician is then left with the predicament of satisfying the patient's request, being seen as a, quote, good doctor, or acknowledging medical reality and protecting the community at large. It's easy to see how hypochondriacal behavior and the anxiety of not knowing can disrupt a person's normal routine, ability to remain employed, and put stress on social relationships. Further, it can undermine trust in the medical profession and the healthcare system, making such a person less likely to seek help when a real problem arises. getting well. Sick people want to get well, don't they? Most do. Why is it that some seem not to? Now that we know about the sick role, we understand there are benefits to being sick as well as to being well. The sick role brings attention, sympathy, and assistance from other people, as well as a degree of control, if not manipulation, over them. It may even entitle a person to financial assistance in the form of disability insurance payments. But this all comes at the cost of limited mobility, reduced activity, and the social stigma attached to sick people. We call these benefits secondary gain. Returning to well status performs a return to one's original self-concept and a sense of independence and strength, along with the responsibilities of caring for oneself. Whether an ill person decides to work toward recovery or allow illness to linger depends on a mental cost-benefit analysis. What will bring him or her the most benefit at the least cost? Indeed, some continue to benefit from secondary gain when it seems that to others that the sensible thing to do is to try to get well. A side note, less often discussed, primary gain refers to the power of a medical diagnosis to alleviate the guilt or anxiety a person experiences when he or she cannot perform a certain task. A man feels bad he cannot work, but then he's found to have multiple sclerosis. This assures them that, quote, it's not his fault, and he gains freedom from anxiety and guilt. Primary gain is emotional. Secondary gain is financial and/or social. Unmet needs in the emergency department. The field of medicine, human anatomy, physiology, disease, and treatment, focuses primarily on biological needs. Our focus here will be on the psychological needs of individuals, the additional requirements to remain well-adjusted and happy. We will deal specifically with how people respond to the challenges to meeting those needs as emergency department patients, as well as the behaviors that manifest when the needs are not met. According to the Beatles, all you need is love. It's a nice thought, but a bit naive. We know there's more to it than that for the human animal. When we meet our complex needs, we are kept physically and psychologically healthy. To be more accurate, I guess we could sing, all you need is oxygen, hydration, nutrition, shelter, sleep, safety, stimulation, social support, respect, knowledge, and a reason to get up in the morning, in that general order. While it won't make for a hit song, it's not a bad checklist for healthy living. The pyramid model of human needs created by Abraham Maslow is one of the pillars of psychology. All people have needs at different levels. Maslow believed the needs on one level must be met before a person can concern himself or herself with the needs of the next highest level. Behavior is motivated toward meeting those needs. People experience stress when those needs are threatened or not met. The Maslowian basic needs are listed below and illustrated in the diagram that you see here. For those of you that can't see the diagram, I'll describe it for you. It is a pyramid. At the very lowest level, it represents the physiological needs of a person. The next level up then is safety. Above that is love and belonging, and then esteem. The tip of the pyramid is self-actualization. Physiological needs include oxygen, breathing, respiration, normal body temperature, water, food, vitamins, minerals, fiber, sleep and rest, disposal of waste products such as urine, feces, and carbon dioxide, exercise and activity, bodily comfort free from pain, nausea, itching, etc., and sexual activity. The next level up, safety needs, include security of employment, security of revenues and resources, physical security, safety from violence, delinquency, aggressions, moral security, familial security, security of health, and shelter from the elements. Moving up to love and belonging needs, this includes friendship, sexual intimacy, and membership in a family. And finally, esteem needs, to be of use, self-respect, respect from others, achievement, success in a work or a leisure activity, knowledge, responsibility, agency, which is doing for oneself and not being dependent. The very top the peak of the pyramid represents self-actualization, a term coined by Kurt Goldstein. This refers to the human tendency to strive to fulfill his or her potential in life. Not everyone gets to this level. Unmet needs at lower levels shift focus away from self-actualization. Those who successfully reach their potential share a few characteristics in common. According to Maslow himself, they embrace the facts and realities of the world, including themselves, rather than denying or avoiding them. They're spontaneous in their ideas and actions. They're creative. They're interested in solving problems. Often this includes the problems of others. Solving these problems is often a key focus in their lives. They feel a closeness to other people and generally appreciate life. They have a system of morality that is fully internalized and independent of external authority. They judge others without prejudice in a way that can be termed objective. Maslow's work is highly regarded in the field of psychology, but it is not without its critics. Research designed around the hierarchy of needs has failed to show that meeting the needs at one level is required to begin addressing the needs of another. It seems people can and do try to meet all their needs simultaneously. For our purposes, this point is trivial. There are needs people have, and becoming a patient in the emergency department creates special challenges to meeting them. The emergency department as a potential threat to human needs. Not every person who becomes a patient in the emergency department will experience a serious threat to his or her human needs. That is to say, it's not a major stressor for every patient. However, sudden illness and the process of seeking emergency treatment certainly have the potential to demand considerable coping mechanisms on the part of the patient. First, let's examine the possible threats to each of Maslow's levels of human needs. Physiological needs. It is not the emergency department itself that most threatens a patient's physiological needs, but rather the disease or injury that brings him or her to the hospital. The body is remarkable in its ability to compensate, but it has its limits. When those limits are reached, a patient is truly sick. The requirement the body is most sensitive to is oxygen. If you're in doubt, see how long you can hold your breath. It's only possible to go without air for a few seconds, a few minutes at most, and then a person loses consciousness. Compare this to the ability to go without water, that is, hydration. Serious problems take 8 to 10 days to develop from dehydration. We can survive without food even longer, about a month or so, but not indefinitely. Various disease processes interfere with the body's ability to take in oxygen, hydration, and nutrition, and get rid of waste materials. Typically, the emergency department environment is not in itself the cause of problems meeting physiological needs. To the contrary, the focus of medical help is to restore the body's ability to meet its needs and regulate its processes. However, the hospital can be the cause for unmet needs of other types, as we will see. 2. The need for safety. The physiological threats disease pose might be seen as cause for psychological stress in the patient. More precisely, a threat to the psychological need for safety. To maintain our mental health, we need to be free from the fear of being injured by others. However, the safety we speak of also refers to, more generally, to our continued soundness of body. When we sense that our body could be failing us, we panic appropriately. If you've ever been caught underwater for more than a few seconds, then you could hold your breath. You've experienced this for yourself. As mentioned, the body has an incredible ability to compensate for many unmet needs. When oxygen is limited, breathing and heart rate speed up. When glucose is not able to enter the cells to be used for energy, as in uncontrolled diabetes, cells use proteins and fats for energy. The byproducts from these alternate energy sources eventually build up and cause other problems, but in the short run, the body is able to do without glucose. The illustration shown here is the progression from a physiological need to a psychological stress response. And for those of you listening, this is a flowchart that begins on the left with lacking something the body needs. The next block over is the body attempts to compensate. And then there's a question. Was the compensation successful? If so, the body goes and continues to compensate in that same way. If not, then there may be a sense of unmet physical need, which can lead to, finally, the final box, psychological stress response. There are other possible threats to an ED patient's sense of safety. A victim of violence may fear the assailant will come to the emergency department and do him or her further harm. The fear some patients have of painful procedures, such as drawing blood or getting stitches, may fit this category as well. Some people have a low tolerance for changes in their usual routine. They may develop a vague feeling of danger whenever they're in an unfamiliar place or surrounded by unfamiliar people. For these people, simply being in the emergency department may activate an unsafe stress response. 3. The needs for love and belonging. People need people, so they say. No man is an island, so they say. These adages speak to our being social animals. It's been shown in many well-known psychological studies that people who are socially isolated for a long time develop psychological problems, even leading to psychosis. Our need for human contact should never be underestimated. Most valuable of all is our need for contact with those who love us. Friends and family give us a sense of security and belonging and help guide our behavior by encouraging certain behaviors and discouraging others. When this need for love is met, we feel valued and secure, that we are successfully, what we'd say, fitting in. Often, emergency medical care involves separating patients from their social support systems, at least temporarily. When injury or illness strikes suddenly, patients may not be with those whose support means the most. They may be taken from the office or supermarket in an ambulance by strangers to a hospital to be poked and prodded by still more strangers. Knowing this, it's less surprising to hear trauma victims ask for a telephone before asking for pain medication. One of those patient behaviors that's always made me wonder why. Most emergency department professionals recognize the importance of allowing family and friends in the room with the patient as soon as it is practicable. But often, exam rooms are too small to hold visitors during certain emergency procedures. 4. Esteem needs. Many factors help maintain our self-esteem. Many of these are compromised when we become patients. One of these is the need to know. Not knowing leaves us feeling helpless and out of control. This is why it calms patients to tell them what is being done, what will happen next, and what their condition is. Another need is agency. We need to do things for ourselves. Being waited on hand and foot may sound appealing, but in reality, we need to feel as though we're able to take care of ourselves. Men especially are socialized to do for themselves. Even the frailest elderly patient may insist that he can walk to the bathroom unassisted. When we act one way in everyday life and another way in the hospital, we feel somehow phony. We often go to great lengths to, quote unquote, be true to ourselves, even when the situation may make us feel otherwise. For example, a woman who usually displays a sweet disposition, that is, her usual self-concept is that of a kind and sweet person, may struggle to hide her fear or anger about being sick. She's trying to continue to be the person she sees herself as. Finally, under this category, we need respect from others. To be disrespected, that is, made to feel less than, is an insult to our self-esteem. Taking patients seriously and treating them with kindness and respect is not just good customer service, but helps us meet a very real psychological need. And 5, self-actualization. When we're confined to a hospital bed, even for a short period of time, we can't participate in the activities we might call our life's work. In a sense, we're pulled out of our normal lives for a time. This can delay our growth towards self-actualization. On the other hand, some patients report that the experience of being ill, helpless, vulnerable, and perhaps facing death teaches them important life lessons. Many cancer patients, for instance, report that facing a life-threatening illness has led them to appreciate life more fully and to take nothing for granted. This type of patient can truly inspire us healthcare professionals. And I'm going to stop there as part 1. This, as you can tell, is a lengthy chapter, and so this is about halfway through the chapter. So thank you very much for joining me for this special podcast project. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, And I will see you next time.